Hello everyone, I'm Kushal and my project's name is Concrete Jungle. My project is about speculating and mapping the decay of the island of Manhattan, which in turn gives itself back to nature. The aim of my project was to investigate, reimagine, and visualize the decay of Manhattan back to Manhattan due to the effects of the climate crisis. I went about this by speculating the morphological changes to the island of Manhattan due to the rise of the floodplain and the overrun of the parks over the course of 4 centuries. The goal of my project was to reimagine a dystopian Manhattan utilizing existing data-driven speculations and information. What triggered this project for me was the climate clock installation, which you can see on the bottom right, which was recently installed in front of the Union Square Park by Andrew Boyd and Gangolan, which is basically a countdown until when climate change can be reversed. Essentially, it's more or less a doomsday clock. As soon as I saw this installation, it got me thinking that 7 years is not that far away. What happens when this clock strikes zero? Studying the work from Eric W. Sanderson, a wildlife conservation ecologist and the author of the Whale Project, who analyzed and depicted Manhattan in the 17th century, I wanted to predict and speculate the transformation of 21st century Manhattan back to Manhattan in the next 400 years. You can see on the top left, you can see the you can see how Manhattan was and what it currently became. I think I wanted to envision and speculate what it could be in the next 400 years. I started my research by understanding Manhattan on two fronts: its current geological conditions and its current structural conditions. Here we look at the current geological conditions. The current geologic and topographical conditions of Manhattan include soil typology, which basically indicates if it's hard rock, dense soil, soft soil, or special soil. The contours, here we have the contours at every 1 meter interval. The green cover, which shows all the existing park spaces within Manhattan, and the floodplain, which indicates the 500-year flood. And it's divided up into zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. The green cover and the floodplain plays a big role in the island's growth both economically and ecologically. Analyzing and inferring from these maps, I started to understand where nature could take over and where it couldn't. The green cover and the flooding played a huge impact in my research as they are the driving factors which will adversely affect Manhattan. Next, I analyzed the existing structural conditions within the borough, studying the zoning, the land use, the heights of the buildings, and the ages of the buildings. This step was equally as important to understand which buildings or areas will subside and decay into nature. The age of buildings and the height of buildings maps were important to understand the structural framework and materiality of the buildings. Comparing them together, I was able to deduce that all of the residential walk-ups which are under 6 stories and over 80 years old are all brick built, which will definitely subside and start to decay. Putting all of these maps together and studying all of these similar conditions, I put up a map on the right which shows all of the buildings which are vulnerable due to either age, height, materiality, or class. These are the buildings which should be taken over by nature. This helped me narrow down the areas which should be affected and which will not. Once I understood the areas which were vulnerable, the I speculated the overrun of parks within Manhattan. Over the course of decades and also centuries, the parks are bound to overrun in the neighboring streets, with tendon-like branches coming out. In this slide, you can observe the growth and overrun of the parks over the course of 400 years, and how much of Manhattan could be lost back to nature. What is evident in these maps is the slow but sure growth of branches from these parks, meeting the branches of other parks at various points and locking that space down. Most of the existing park spaces in Manhattan are situated in Lower Manhattan, which is favorable for decay as a soil type in this area is favorable, as well as the nourishment which they will receive from all of the flooded zones. The final map is a speculation of the vulnerable areas as well as the green overruns. As you can observe, large chunks of Manhattan have been stripped off of its face, where a lot of the areas have been overrun by parks or conquered by the floods. The final map shows what will be left of Manhattan and what will be the new Manhattan. Thank you.